Coming up on More Than Before.
It's a real intentional thing. Every day, say, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to do my best to see the best, believe the best, speak the best.
This is More Than Before with Nathan Cook.
Hey everyone, welcome back. You are in for a real treat today. This is going to be an explosive episode. My guest has over 34 years in uniform service, from the United States Navy to serving as a police officer in his community. He has been married for over 33 years, which has produced two amazing young men and powerful lessons that he and his wife are constantly teaching to their clients. He and his wife are the owners of Sheepdog Marriage, the transformational company that helps marriages of military personnel and first responders just strengthen their marriage. He is a man of honor, of humor, and truth. He is a good friend of mine, and I'm excited to have him on today. Chris Ruediger, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. Good afternoon, listeners. And Nathan, it's great to be with you. And I've been looking forward to this opportunity. You and I always have a good time together.
We do. We just have to keep it PC. No, just kidding.
Yes.
Well, it's funny because as I was thinking back to when we first met each other, our wives and us were attending a marriage certification training to become marriage coaches. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking over, you were wearing a police shirt on. And you had reached over into the box of donuts, and I said, "Oh, look! It didn't take you long to find the donuts, did it?"
Just follow me to the best donut place in town.
And that's what started us on our great snarky journey of being friends with one another.
Yes.
But I'd love to start out by just kind of having you share with everyone, what are you guys currently working on, you and your wife? You guys have this marriage business, coaching business that you guys are building right now.
Yes.
You have a lot of stuff going on. So give us a little bit of a lowdown of what's going on in your world.
We went through our own marriage reboot in 2019, and since then have been on a journey to share what we believe is a transformational process in marriage for anybody. But particularly for us, we have a passion for those that serve in uniform because that is our experience. But we truly believe that strengthening marriages is one of the foundational keys to transforming our society top to bottom. My wife Tina and I founded Sheepdog Marriage, and we transitioned out of I've been in uniform. I was in uniform for 34 years, and we are transitioning out of uniform service into full-time marriage ministry. So I am still working another job, but it is not in uniform, and we are making our way into being independent, an independent company, so to speak.
I love that so much. Now, if you guys couldn't tell, he kind of has a little bit of an accent. He's originally from Long. What are you talking about? Originally from Long Island, right?
Yes.
What was childhood like for you growing up? What were some of those early childhood memories? You and your brother maybe getting into mischief.
Oh my gosh! Growing up on Long Island was a blast. That was a good time. We of course are water people. We live close to the beach. And my brother is 3 years older than myself, and we grew up in a bit of a strict German home. And so my father came over from Germany when he was 19 originally, and so we had a pretty organized home, and we had some heavy standards at home, but we also liked to have a very good time. And so growing up was a lot of fun. My father bartered with somebody for a weekend home on Fire Island. I don't want anybody to think that we were, raised with a silver spoon in our mouth. He bartered his very skilled labor for weekends on Fire Island. And we had pets, we had dogs, we lived across the street from a park, and we played sports, and we were adventurous, and we traveled with our parents, taught us the love of travel. And so we had a good childhood. We really did.
What were some of those early childhood lessons that you learned? I mean, because you grew up in a military family, correct? Like your entire family is kind of military, you could say.
Yes.
And so with that, there is the strictness that you were talking about,
Yes.
A militantness to family. But there's also a lot of lessons that I think that can be learned. What were some of those early lessons that you learned from either your parents or even from your uncles or aunts?
My father was never active duty military. He was a reservist, but he was a reservist for about probably almost 25, 30 years. And his service began when I was a teenager. My brother and I were teenagers. Prior to that, my grandfather was in PT boats in World War II. My mother's brother, my uncle, he was the only Army guy. Everybody was Navy. Got to have one. So he was in the Army in Vietnam. My grandfather's brother was backseat gunner on a hell diver in World War II. So altogether, my brother's a retired Navy SEAL. Dad was a CB, a mobile construction battalion guy. Mom was a SK, a storekeeper on a ship for 8 years as a reservist. So it definitely is a family affair. And and it wasn't all so much when I was initially growing up, but obviously a family that goes in that direction at some point. It's innate in you. You may not realize it, but it's innate in you. And so, so our household growing up was very structured. As I said, my father came over from Germany when he was 19, and his next oldest sibling was about, I think, 15 years older than him. And so he grew up as kind of like, the last child in a German household. And so children would kind of be seen and not heard. All that being said, growing up in that home, we learned a lot of fantastic skills. We learned a great work ethic. From my father and my mother. My mother was adamant about us having a relationship with God. We were raised in a Roman Catholic church. I say that I developed at some point, I became a non-denominational Christian and developed my own relationship with God. But that was a solid foundation in God, God's word, walking with God. And so, believe it or not, I was a very, very timid, quiet kid. And
that's very surprising to even imagine.
Yes. And so I learned a lot of life lessons there. I worked carpentry with my father. My father was a very skilled carpenter. And I worked with him from a very early age. In the summertime, breaks from school, my brother and I took swim lessons when we were kids. We had paper routes. We were taught very early on to be independent. We didn't have a whole lot of financial skills. That was not something that was handed down to us. So the alternative is a great work ethic, working very hard. And not that rich people don't work hard, but we certainly were not getting any handouts.
There's kind of a work hard mentality of like working with your hands, of kind of like not being afraid to just get in and do it yourself kind of thing. Yes.
And my father was, again, very skilled craftsman. He taught us how to use hand tools. He had his own business. My mother worked several jobs as we got older, and just good, hardworking people.
So what kind of student were you in school? I kind of, you never quite know, from like, usually the quiet ones are pretty good students. I don't know. I kind of tend to think that, but like, what kind of student were you in school?
Terrible. I passed. I graduated high school with like half a point to spare. For me, it was not necessarily a lack of capability or knowledge. Believe it or not, despite the strict household that we grew up in, I just kind of was lazy, and our parents were pretty strict about a lot of things, and they made us do our homework. But I think in every child, you can force them to sit in front of a desk, and you can force them to put a book in front of them. But if their heart and their mind just aren't in it, it doesn't matter, right? So we had good parents; they were well intended, but I was kind of lazy when it came to that. That didn't pique my interest. And so I graduated. I had half a point to spare. I graduated high school. I went into the Navy. I've been through a multitude of schools in the Navy, which require intellect and study. And So over the years, I've gotten much better. But my younger years, no, I was not well inclined to be a student.
Well, I think it also is kind of interesting about your story is you had a dream of doing something very specific with your life in terms of culinary. Because
Yes.
you had a passion for cooking, right?
Yes.
And going into the military wasn't necessarily the dream thing, which is funny that you spent so many years
Right.
in uniform. You actually had a passion and a desire for cooking. Where did that come from? And how did that lead you into, joining the Navy?
Right. So as high school, so I grew up cooking with my mom. That's where it began, in the kitchen with my mom. Making Christmas cookies at first, which turned into, hey, have you ever used a wok? No, let's try it out. And, just experimenting with things, and we love to eat. So it was a natural progression, spending time with mom in the kitchen, and I really enjoyed it. And as the end of high school approached, I was not a great student. So I was not really, neither of my parents were traditional college graduates. And so there was not a big push to go down the traditional college line. But I really enjoyed cooking, and I thought about going to culinary school. But I certainly did not have the funds for that. And my parents, again, were not traditional college. So the whole college loans and, the traditional path you would use just wasn't there. And there was a huge military connection with our family. And so, it just makes sense, right? I'll go into the military. I'll go into the Navy, the family tradition, and I'll get money for school. And after 4 years of the Navy, I'll go to culinary school. I'll become a chef. And so that was the initial plan.
That's how it always starts, right?
Yes.
I'm just going to go in for a little bit.
That's right.
Tina, your wife, did you meet her prior to going into the military, or did you guys actually meet while you were serving?
I was about 3 or 4 years into the Navy when Tina and I met. And I was a cook on a submarine, and and somewhere I became when I was on the submarine, I was selected to go to dive school and become a diver for the submarine, a scuba diver. In the process of that, I was introduced to a program called EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. And basically, the tagline was, hey, if you're interested in getting paid to jump out of airplanes and blow stuff up and shoot guns, this is for you. I was like, heck yeah, sign me up. So as my submarine was decommissioning, I was up for orders, and I got orders to EOD school. Well, EOD school at the time began with dive school in Panama City, Florida. So I transferred from Hawaii to Panama City, Florida. And my very first weekend in Panama City, Florida, I met with a shipmate, a friend of mine, and he was also going into EOD school. And he and I instantly hit it off because we were both cooks. So it was a very uncommon source going into EOD school. So he and I hit it off, and he had invited a young lady to see her, to come to, they came to Panama City together. And this other young woman met my buddy, and he wanted them to come back the following weekend. Well, his love, his connection said, I'm not coming back unless you find a friend for my friend. And so that's how it began. And I swore I would never do a blind date. And I was like, EOD school is very serious business. Me and God had an agreement. I'm not messing around. I'm not chasing skirts, so to speak. Right? I'm focused. I'm dedicated. Yeah, that didn't last long.
Well, I think even rewinding just a little bit, to your time of being on a submarine, that's a very unique experience in itself. There aren't very many people that actually, some people go and they get to go into a decommissioned sub, and you get to kind of explore, oh, this is cool. But no, you were actually out in the water for months.
Yes.
Which is pretty incredible. And then there are other experiences that you had in the sub that I thought were pretty fascinating, like sleeping. Your sleeping arrangements were pretty intense, I would say.
Yes.
Like your entire life has kind of been explosive, shall we say?
It has.
And and it's so cool. Like there are so many cool experiences in your life, from being able to sleep on a torpedo as your bunk for a while,
yes,
to being able to meet Santa Claus in the North Pole.
Yes.
I mean, you brought Santa Claus with you. Let's be
Yes.
honest, you didn't meet him out there. But
hey, listen, for all the kids, Santa Claus was there. We saw Santa Claus at the North Pole.
You're a wise man.
I'm not going to be that guy.
I'll be that guy. I'll be that guy for you. No. But you really have had some really cool experiences in your service with the Navy. I'm curious, how did the Navy shape you into kind of who you are? Because we read a lot, we've seen a lot of movies where, you know, whenever you go into the military, they strip you down to nothing, and then they build you back up into a certain persona.
Right.
And while that is true to an extent, you still have your individuality.
Yes.
Who came out of the military? Like, not like who did you become after military, but what did the military make you into?
Yeah. So clearly, I availed myself, once in the military, I availed myself of a path that leads to being a warrior. And I didn't know it at the time when I came in, but that's clearly the path that I felt drawn to. And like I said, when I was young, I was very timid. I cried a lot in school. I was not the most popular guy. I was kind of a mama's boy. But in the background, we had, growing up with my dad, very strict household, very, like you said, kind of militarized, even though my father was not wearing the uniform necessarily at that time. But we had the whole family history of military. We watched all the World War II movies, and just kind of, there was a draw for that, a draw to that for me. And when crazy enough, when one of the shows that we watched when I was a kid was a British PBS series called Danger UXB, and it chronicles the life of one of the first World War II EOD techs, bomb techs. And we watched that as a family. It was like a 13-show miniseries, and I was just enamored with that. I was like, these guys walking up to unexploded bombs and saving lives, and so that whole kind of aura led me into the military. Then once I got into the military, my initial plans were to get the money for culinary school and go that route. But when at some point I was a scuba diver going into the Navy, civilian, went to Hawaii, couldn't afford to scuba dive in Hawaii. But I figured the Navy can pay me to do that. So I went to dive school, and of course I said that led into the EOD school. And once that connection was made, and it kind of brought me back to that Danger UXB show, I was like, yeah, let's do it. This is absolutely it for me. And of course my brother's a retired Navy SEAL, and so he kind of had the same draw. And so I think that was innate in us, and it just kind of came out as all of the circumstances aligned.
And you also were kind of marked with leadership too, right? Because you got in, and all of a sudden you have one guy that is removed for some special, Mary Jane, and then a couple things happen, and then finally, you are put in charge,
right? Right.
On your very first, like it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Some leaders are born, and some leaders are thrust into it, and they either sink or swim. And I would like to think that I swam, but I definitely was not born with it. As I said, I was kind of a timid guy, but I definitely was thrust into it, beginning the very first days in the military. So when I got recruited out of New York, we were flown to San Diego for boot camp, and the very first night in boot camp, one of my shipmates in boot camp I guess he had like dropped some acid that morning at the recruiter's office or before him being picked up by the recruiter. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, it kicked in fully. And when we showed up at boot camp, they just make assignments, right? They're like, okay, you're going to be the company commander. You're going to be this, you're going to be that. And I'm the youngest guy in the company. I'm 17. My parents had assigned for me to come in, and they just assigned me as the master at arms, which is the cop, the law enforcement for the company. And this guy is losing his mind at 2 o'clock in the morning. Big dude, 6'2", and everybody is woken up by him throwing stuff around. They all wake up and they look at me and like, "You're the master at arms. Deal with it." And so, so I got an early indoctrination. And then when I showed up at my first assignment, the USS Queenfish, I was, young mess management specialist. My first assignment, new to the Navy, and we were preparing for our first deployment, a long deployment. And as we were approaching the final days before deployment, our E6, our LPO, leading petty officer, he got busted smoking dope in the cooler, and he got positive on a urinalysis. So he was automatically taken out. So there was an E5. There was a guy below him, an E5. Well, about 2 weeks before we deployed, he goes to we're in Hawaii. He goes to a doctor's visit because he's got some stuff on his arm. And it turns out he has, I think they call it psoriasis, which is basically like a kind of a dry skin disease. And his prescription to fix that is sunshine.
Not really a good place to be on a sub.
And so the doctor says, okay, you can't go on deployment. You're in Hawaii. You just need to hang out outside more. And so, boom, I'm now the leading petty officer of the Mess Management Specialist Department as the USS Queenfish is getting ready to go on a 90-day deployment. Welcome aboard.
Well, I think it's so funny, just like how these small little pieces throughout your life have prepared you to be where you are today.
Yes.
And it's cool to see all those different connections. So you meet Tina, you said like around 4 years in, and I'm curious because how did your relationship do with you being in the military? Because people who go into the military and are either married from before or even during, it's a really rough season. You know, most people do not last in their marriage when it comes to, being in the service.
Right.
How did you guys last?
When people ask what's the secret to a long marriage, my wife and I always laugh and say deployments. But there's an interesting dichotomy in that in our marriage coaching now, we are consistently telling people, advising people, recommending people to slow down. Slow down your life and be intentional. And all the things that go with that. Well, the irony is, when we first came together, we were going 100 miles an hour. And thank God we were, because if we were going slower, we would not have realized what a mess we were walking into. Like, we would not, have we been going slow enough to realize maybe we should really, be a bit more intentional about this, I don't know that we would be here today.
Yeah.
She and I came together like two rocket ships, 100 miles an hour, and we just launched off together. We literally dated for about 4 months, and that was long distance. And so
makes sense.
Yeah. And by the way, we're not recommending that. We're just telling you that it can work, but that's not our recommendation.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that we were going 100 miles an hour enabled us to be oblivious, kind of like the horse with the blinders on, to be oblivious to all the odds against us. We did both my parents, Tina's parents are both divorced. And I don't say that to say anything derogatory about our parents, but clearly it was not super strong marital relationships. And neither one of us came from that. Neither one of us came from strong financial family backgrounds. And so when we came together, we're just we're going so fast, the trouble can't keep up with us.
It's accumulating behind you, but
Yes,
it's not
accumulating
catching you.
behind us, but it can't keep up with us. And so from our perspective, just everything's great. We're like, this is awesome. I love her. She loves me. You know, the movie Officer and a Gentleman was very popular at that time. And, you know, the two of us rode off into the sunset. In dive school, they called us a petty officer and a country chick in fashion of Officer and a Gentleman. So it was a very fast relationship and very fast moving and growing relationship.
Was there a point in your guys' marriage where it actually did catch up with you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I did a total of 34 years in uniform, and about the 28-year mark, 4 years into my law enforcement career, and we were also empty nesters. And life has a way of slowing you down, right? The career field I was in is kind of a young man's game, and as skilled as you are and as determined as you are, you start to slow down. And as you slow down, you're forced to recognize these things, deal with these things. And if they've been going on for 28 years and building for 28 years, at the point that you recognize them and confront them, you've got quite the mountain to tackle. And so, yes, at the 28-year mark, Tina and I, my wife Tina and I, came about as close to divorcing as you can come without getting divorced. And it was not a good time in either of our lives. Regrettable, but we don't live in regret. Everything, God takes good or bad and uses it for good. And here we are today. And we learned some very valuable lessons. God helped us to reconcile, in fact, keep it together, and in fact, go from just surviving in marriage to thriving in marriage. And a lot of those lessons are born from that 28 years of experience, looking back on it, dissecting it, and realizing that, okay, we definitely could have done things differently. But a lot of the characteristics that gave us the ability to fight through that were developed during those 28 years.
And you actually had a couple different things that kind of altered your life and caused you to stop and pause for a moment. In fact, if I recall, you were actually hit while you were on your bike by a car. And
Yes.
that really caused you to slow down for a moment. What did that play in your life in terms of trying to identify who you are? Because, you know, throughout your entire life, you've had these positions. You know, within the military, you have a rank, you know, you're somewhere on the pecking order, you know where you are.
Yes.
And then when you get to a place where all of that could be taken away and your identity is no longer in a position, a lot of people are left trying to figure out what they're going to do. Who am I? And I'm curious, how has that kind of reared its head in your life, being in careers where there is a position to maybe even being pulled out of it for a brief moment to say, hey, guess what? Your position is not permanent.
Right. So there was a very scary period, and this is coming from a guy that's a bomb tech, right? There was a very scary period in my life, our life, where I transitioned from military into law enforcement. And so in 2013, I retired from the Navy. We were living here in Virginia Beach, we being Tina and myself and our sons, our adult sons. And our youngest son was graduating high school, getting ready to go off to college. And so we were, you know, I was not expecting to get out of the Navy necessarily when I got out. And so it was kind of a quick transition. I needed a job. And so I took a job with a company in Virginia Beach, and God bless them. They didn't know what they were getting into. I didn't know what I was getting into. I needed a job. They offered me a job. And from that perspective, it was a match made in heaven, right? Well, very quickly, we both found out that
It was a night marriage.
Yes. 26 years in the military had caused me to be institutionalized, right? Usually that's a term that they speak of for somebody in prison. Well, listen, the military, there are some correlations there, okay? And so I was institutionalized, and myself and corporate America didn't really get along. Now, I don't blame corporate America. They are what they are, and it's great. We need them. But we just were not necessarily compatible. And so after a year in that job, my wife, God bless her, recognized that I was miserable, like the most miserable she'd ever seen me. And she said, this is not who you are. It's the polar opposite of who you are. And I'm tired of seeing you miserable. And we're going to fix this by getting you back into uniform. And so my wife was actually the key initiator in me becoming a police officer in Florida, getting me back into uniform. And so that brought me back into being the sheepdog, serving as a sheepdog. And while that served my personality well, continuing that path, down that path of serving others, serving the country, serving the nation, going into serving the community, serving the city, I was neglecting my own family, is the irony of it. I'm out to make the world a better place for my family to live in, better community, and all the while I'm actually not serving my family. And so anyway, that transition kept me in uniform, made me very happy, but it didn't take long to figure out that, hey, my priorities are not where they should be.
Mm. What was the shift for you to start examining those priorities and actually putting those in the right place? Because, you know, throughout life, we have our priorities at one point. We're like, this is the most important thing. Like you kind of said, like, you know, God was the most important thing to you. And then somewhere along the lines, things kind of start to blur and they start to shift. And, you know, one thing overpasses the next. And all of a sudden, your most important priority, singular, becomes completely off the list almost.
Yes.
What was that like for you to kind of look at where your priority was in life, and how did you make that shift to get it back to where it needed to be?
Right. So by virtue of being a military guy, a sheepdog, and having the personality of just working by taking orders and needing things to be pointed out to you, right? I'm a pretty smart guy, but I was not often the leader. I'm more of that kind of secondary leader, right? That you give him a task, he will get the job done, he will do it well, and he will do it with excellence. I fit well into following orders and following a mission plan, and I did that. I did that for a long time. About that 28-year mark, when our kids were out of the house, my wife and I were alone together in the house. We're empty nesters, and you know, the inevitable, at some point I'm coming out of uniform, right? I mean, you're not going to stay in uniform until you're 90, if you live that long. So the inevitable transition, as we started to slow down, it became clearly evident that, hey, you know, we need to work on our marriage. And we've been going so fast for so long that we didn't know each other. We didn't have the skills to communicate well with each other. We didn't have a singular vision and purpose. We were just there. And we had no idea how to relate to one another, how to respect one another. And our marriage suffered for that, to the point where we were ready to get a divorce. And thank God that we were obedient. That's the one thing I can say. I wish I could say that we had this great revelation, you know, and the angel sang, and she and I reconciled. No, it wasn't that pretty. It was awful. The one thing we had going for us was that we were determined that we were not going to continue a legacy of divorce in our family, and God brought us together for some reason. Don't know what, but we were just going to be obedient. And so thank God we found Married for a Purpose, and we went through a marriage reboot with Greg and Julie Gorman. And Greg Gorman, God bless them, both the Gormans, they're fantastic. They're awesome at what they do. we connected, and it took Greg Gorman basically, not literally, but proverbially, hitting me over the head with a 2x4, going, bro, what are you doing? You're a sheepdog, and you're a warrior, and you're good at it, but you have completely missed the mark on what your number one priority is. And it's sitting right next to you. She is sitting next to you. It's your family. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, well, yeah, that's always been the priority. And it's like, no, it hasn't. You thought it was the priority in your heart and your head, but your actions were not making it the priority, your family and your marriage. And so that hit really hard. And that was the point where really Tina and I both began to be enlightened about who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it. And we had a lot of makeup work to do, right? There've been a lot of bridges burnt over the years. And we had a lot of makeup work to do. But we knew, coming out of that process, we knew that God had a purpose for our marriage, had a purpose for each of us. We started seeing a vision for our family, for our marriage, a legacy. And at the time, we really were not huge fans of what was going on in the world, in our nation. Love America, number one patriot, but there's room for improvement. And we realized that, especially working in law enforcement, we realized that one of the biggest downfalls is broken families, broken marriages, and broken families. And so after we got it right within our own four walls, that was number one, is stop. Stop trying to help everybody else. Stop trying to fix the nation. Stop trying to fix the world. Stop trying to fix the community, and get it right within your own four walls. And so that's where the journey began.
Yeah. Well, I love that you've brought up a number of times, being a sheepdog. And for those of you listening, you think of a sheepdog, oh, like a little fluffy dog runs around and it's making sure the sheep don't get out. And there's a lot of aspects that come to being a sheepdog. And I've heard you describe it. You've kind of, everyone falls into one of three different categories. You're either a sheep, you're a sheepdog, or you're a wolf. Mm-hmm. And you're one of those three. And you have to determine which one you are. And then you have to realize that you have a responsibility to show up in that capacity. Yeah. I would love for you to describe what is a sheepdog to people that are listening, that are going, oh, a sheepdog, what is a sheepdog? And we're not talking literally like a sheepdog. There is a when he talks about sheepdog, he's talking about a specific concept that is taught militarily. Can you unpack that for everyone?
Yes. So the correct attribute or person to attribute it to is Colonel Dave Grossman. Colonel Dave Grossman is a prolific speaker, teacher, trainer for law enforcement and military. He had a fantastic military career. He taught at the Army Academy at West Point. He's a devout, faithful Christian, and he is the bee's knees when it comes to tactical psychology. And so he puts everybody into, as you said, in one of three categories. You are either a sheep, a sheepdog, or a wolf. These are general categories. Some people get offended. Oh, sheep are dirty and dumb and okay. It's just relax, people. It's a figure of speech, okay?
Just breathe.
That's right. Just breathe.
You can always go from sheep to becoming a sheepdog if you make that choice.
That's right.
Just like a sheepdog can get a taste of blood and become a wolf.
Yes. So you fit into one of three categories. So the sheep is the good citizen. The sheep is the person who has no capacity for violence. It can be male or female. It doesn't matter. You are the person that really has no capacity for violence. You go about your business. You take care of your family. You do what you're supposed to do, and that's it. Now, the wolf, on the other hand, has a capacity for violence. And the wolf has no empathy for other human beings, has no interest in anything but themselves, and they are the proverbial psychopath. And they are out for the wolf, and they feed on the sheep, right? So here's the interesting piece. The sheepdog also has a capacity for violence, but the sheepdog has a great empathy for their fellow man. They stand in the gap. They protect the sheep from the sheepdog, right? And so you fit into one of those three categories. Well, here's the interesting piece when it comes to relationships and why we call ourselves Sheepdog Marriage. The sheepdog has a capacity for violence. In many aspects, the sheepdog can look and sound a lot like the wolf. And so people tend to be a little bit, I like the sheepdog when I need him, but otherwise, could you stay in the corner, please? Right? And the sheepdog is ready and willing to expend themselves completely, protecting the flock, protecting society, and they will expend themselves completely in that effort. Well, if you're married to the sheepdog, guess what? Maybe you didn't sign up for that. Maybe you didn't realize what you were getting into. Maybe you're not as much about the rest of the community and the world as your sheepdog spouse, right? And this can be really difficult for a marriage. And not to mention the disparity between the sheep and the sheepdog. It's not always a love relationship. Here lately in society, we see a real dark side of people, how they see law enforcement, even how they see military, right?
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of that, well, you've got big fangs and you got a capacity for violence a lot like the wolf, and that makes me nervous.
Yeah, that's huge. So I'm curious, you've had some pretty amazing mentors in your life. I know Greg Gorman has been one of those. You've had a number of people throughout your military career, your father, your mother. As you look back on your life, who were some of those people that really formed your identity to help you see kind of who you were created to be outside of the circumstances that you found yourself in?
I'm not one of those people that has like one or two people that I really, other than Jesus, right? I mean, that's just appropriate.
Yeah.
But throughout my life, I've really tried to draw the best out of anybody that I encounter, whether it's somebody living that I'm witnessing and dealing with and serving with alongside or under, or whether it's somebody from a book, somebody from history that was a fantastic leader. There is one leader in my Navy career that really stands out. I never told him this. His name is Tim Ruediger. He's and the ironic thing is he and I started EOD school together, and his wife is also named Tina. So there were two Tina R's in our EOD pipeline. Anyway, Tim Ruediger, huge, strong leader, strong Christian, and I've always admired him. His skill as an EOD tech, tactically, as a father and husband, as a Christian, just tremendous man. And I hope maybe I'll send this to him. I hope that it's time to tell him. But over the years, there have been lots of folks. Anybody that has a foundation in Christ and follows those principles, follows those pathways, and is able to stand up in real difficult times and make those difficult decisions as a leader, despite all of the pressure from society. Those are the people that I really, really respect and want to emulate and drive me to be the best version that I can be of myself.
Something that I've also found too with a lot of people that are very sure of kind of who they are. Like you were talking earlier about kind of the sensitive nature that you had when you were a kid. And then, it's not necessarily a welcomed thing within the military.
Yeah.
But there is something to be said about being intentional with your emotions of really knowing what's going on inside. And one of those pieces that I have found with a lot of people that are very sure of who they are is the confidence that they have in who they are so that they can forgive other people.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what is forgiveness? Like what part has forgiveness played in your life as you've become, a strong sheepdog to be a member of the community? How important has forgiveness been in your life?
Oh, extremely, extremely. And as I said several times, growing up as a young man, I was a pretty sensitive guy. I got my feelings hurt quite a bit, and I think growing up in that really gave me a lot of time to spend being introspective and developing a great sense of empathy, and that has followed me throughout my career. In that I've had both that call to duty and to take care of my responsibilities and, toe the line and follow the rules. But at the same time, I developed a great empathy for other people and an understanding that nobody's perfect. Everybody has bad days. A man deserves to be known for his best day, not his worst day. And really try to carry that out as much as I can, because accomplishing the mission is always critically important. But if there isn't a spiritual component to that, a uplifting of the character of the people around you in that, then really what's the point? And so that ability to have empathy really showed in my military career, my law enforcement career. Sometimes some people would say I'm probably too empathetic, too easygoing, but I really believe in the spirit of man, of humankind, of humanity, to rise above. And the only way to do that is to give somebody that opportunity. And more times than not, I've been very happy that in giving somebody that opportunity and giving somebody a second chance and giving somebody the opportunity to better themselves in spite of what the current evidence and circumstances dictate.
That's so powerful, especially with your career within law enforcement, because it's so easy. And I've known a number of people that have been in law enforcement. It's so easy because you truly do see some of the darkest things as a police officer. And you see a lot of the underbelly. You see a lot of hurting people. And I'm curious, where does that empathy come from? Where do you think you learned that? Because I know a lot of officers that go into situations and they're looking for the worst. Like they're not looking for the best of humanity and people. They're looking for, what's the issue here and how do I need to de-escalate and solve the issue? Right. Versus you have this demeanor, and it's very rare. I think it's a demeanor of looking for the best and trying to elevate the best in that person. Where does that come from?
Right. A desire to not be dragged down into a dark place that you can be taken to if you're not careful. And so I want to take a moment to applaud everybody out there in law enforcement, first responders, those in the military in uniform. These people go out every day and they see the worst of the worst. And it's almost, not even almost, it's a self-protection feature. Because if you allow yourself to be disappointed, in other words, if you try and see the best in people, and it just winds up in disappointment time and time and time over and over and over, at some point you become a cynic. It's like there's nothing but bad in the world. Everybody's a liar, right? And but you have to remember that you've chosen to work in a field where you put yourself in that place where what you see is disproportionately bad, right? And so you really have to. It's a real intentional thing to every day say, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to do my best to see the best, believe the best, speak the best. And over the course of time, you develop a sense when you're right and when you're wrong. Or when, like, okay, empathy is great, but this person, now through my military career and a few times in my law enforcement career, this is not all bravado and everything, but I'm very confident in looking into the camera and saying, I've seen evil. And I don't mean like bad, like these are not good people, they're not really, would not be your best friend. I'm talking straight up evil. You look into their eyes and all you see is blackness and or darkness. And so over time, you know, that helps you to go, okay, this person is bad, but they're not evil, right? This is a person who's having a bad day. They've made some bad choices, and this is an appropriate place for me to extend that empathy and take an opportunity to help them. Whereas opposed, like this person needs to be taken, separated from society. Like they're bad.
Well, it's very interesting because I love what you say about this. It's almost this realization for all of us, really, because we all have our own little microcosm of the world. And we see things in the microcosm that we are in. Like if you're in the military or if you're in law enforcement, like you're going in and you're seeing very specific people. You're not getting called over for a birthday party. Right. Like, hey, yes. Like Timmy wanted to meet a police officer today. Like that's not normally happening.
Right.
If you're working, as a trauma triage nurse, like you're not going in and delivering babies, and it's not like happy-go-lucky stuff. Like you have to understand wherever you are, you're in a microcosm of the world. It's not the complete picture of the world.
Yes.
And I love with what you were just saying with that, Chris, of like, even with the things that you've seen, there's such an extreme line of you could have someone that's having just a really bad day to someone who is just completely evil and just wants to hurt other people.
Yes.
And being able to tell the difference between the two, realizing that there is an actual spectrum there, which I think is important for all of us to realize that in our lives, we're going to meet people on both sides of the spectrum, but you have to be willing to identify them and look for the good as much as you can. Chris, I've absolutely loved our time together. Like you've given us so much to think about, so much to chew on. I do have one more question, but before I ask it, though, I want to encourage all of you guys listening, go follow Chris and his wife. They have a great podcast called Sheepdog Marriage. It's currently on an off season right now, but they are going to be bringing it back soon. So make sure you go.
We're bringing it back.
Make sure you go subscribe because you're not going to want to miss it when it comes out. They have some really awesome, candid conversations that you guys are going to love being a fly on the wall for those things. The other thing too is if you are in uniform service and you feel like your marriage is just holding on by a string, falling apart, can I just encourage you, don't do it alone. Reach out, contact Chris, contact Tina. They will help you to create the marriage that you've always wanted. It is possible, and they're a living testament of this. You can go to sheepdogmarriage.com to find out more. Truly, their ministry is just so powerful. And no matter where you are, they will meet you where they are, and they'll encourage you to get to a place that is really healthy in your marriage. Chris, you've had some really amazing opportunities in your life. You've had some extreme opportunities in your life too. All right. I think handling bombs is a pretty big thing. I don't think I know too many people that do that in the day-to-day life. But given your extensive experience in high pressure roles as an EOD, an explosive ordnance disposal technician, your law enforcement days as an officer, what parallels do you draw between diffusing bombs, de-escalating conflict, and navigating the complexities of like a long-term marriage? And how Like, how do these skills uniquely help you in the approach that you guys have as marriage coaches, you and your wife?
So thank you for setting me up for that, Nathan. You know I've got to go with a joke, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, IEDs don't scare me because I've been married for 33 years, okay? Things blowing up in my face at work or at home, not much difference. No, really. There are a lot of parallels in that things are, you have to discover a rhythm, and you have to realize the peaks and the valleys. And you also have to train as hard at your marriage as you do your career field, right? In order to go out in the field and confront IEDs, you don't just go to a quick school and they send you out there and you learn it as you go, right?
Yeah.
You go through lots of training, you have practice, you have mentors, you have people that help you, and marriage is much the same way in that your marriage is going to be better for the more training that you do. But even with all the training that you do, just like in the EOD world, sometimes things can blow up in your face even when you're doing it right. And so you really, for us, there is a spiritual component. We are connected to God. God created the institution of marriage. He created a rule book for it. And so we try and follow that. But we try and train as much for our marriage as we do the career field. And in the career field, there are so many unpredictable things. And in the EOD world, you are highly dependent on your teammates. You have a lot of skills, you have a lot of gifts, you have a lot of talents, but you can't fool yourself. You're not going to get it done without your teammates. It's warfare, whether it's physical or spiritual, and your spouse has to be your partner, and you have to be familiar. You have to have confidence in your partner, and so many times we sell our spouses short. I'm the sheepdog, right? I'm the warrior, so I'm the strong one, right? Yeah, not nearly. The things that Tina has faced and confronted and dealt with, without the training, right? And so, really, there's a lot of parallels between marriage and my career field, having to do with training, with persistence, with sticking it out in the tough times, recognizing when you don't have the training that you need, and being able to find the resources to get it, being connected in the fight. So again, just lots of correlations there. And a career in uniform is tough. It really is. We need more people in uniform, but what we need even more than that is for those people in uniform to be strong. Your marriage can actually be the strongest thing you have. We just don't give it the time. We don't give it the consideration, and we don't nurture it the way we do our careers.
Man, that is amazing. And there's so much wisdom in what he just said. Go back and re-listen to what he just said, because there's so many small little nuggets that if you take this and you apply it to your marriage, you're going to see so much benefit. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. I know that this episode is just going to touch so many people. If you're out there and you want to connect with Chris, go find his information in the show notes. You can go to sheepdogmarriage.com. And for all of you listening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help in getting the word out. Until next time, remember to be more, see more, and experience more than before.